If Clark Kent and Superman are two halves of the same whole, one representing hope and one just being a down-to-earth man, then it seems to me that this movie needed a director that could set up scenes practically and in a relatable way so as not to distract from that symbolism or meaning. Unfortunately, as we know about Snyder, he really only cares about tone and setting up visuals, really neglecting other important things like characterization and storytelling. What that means is that there's often a glaring gap between the intention he has for a scene and the execution of that scene. In other words, this exact thing is Snyder's biggest weakness as a director. Bearing that in mind, let's look at one of the most controversial scenes in Man of Steel. I am of course talking about the death of Jonathan Kent. Right off the bat, the setup for this scene, one that is ultimately meant to have intense meaning for Clark, begins with some very distracting choices in direction. Here's what I mean. Clark is having an argument with Jonathan about wanting to find his own way in life. You know, this is the kind of scene that's meant to be like a coming-of-age moment where the young character is shown to be frustrated by what the world wants for him, by what his family wants for him, the kind of thing any rebellious young teenager would say to their parents. Except, wait a second, that isn't a young rebellious teenager, that's Henry Cavill, as in a fully grown, 30-year-old adult man. See, there are 3 actors that play Clark in this movie. There's this kid who played 9-year-old Clark, this teenager who played the 13-year-old version of Clark, and then there's beefy adult Clark. So, the filmmakers had 3 options for casting in this scene. Option 1, they could have dressed up 13-year-old Clark, who's already an actual teenager, to look just a little bit older. Option 2, they could have actually hired a 4th, slightly older teenage actor. Or option 3, dress a grown-ass man up in a hip sweater, slather some gel in his hair, and have him act like a whiny man-child.
I don't even know why I'm listening to you. You're not my dad. You're just some guy who found me in a field.
Evidently, they took option 3. And it kinda makes me feel embarrassed for the actor. Or I would, if it wasn't so funny and frustrating to see an adult man acting like a teenager. Which ultimately contributes to the reasons why this whole sequence, which is supposed to be very emotionally charged, ends up distracting us from its intention due to its unintentionally funny execution. I don't even think this is really a coming-of-age moment, no. I think this is an Uncle Ben moment. I think, like with Raimi's Spider-Man, Snyder meant for this argument to make Clark feel guilty about arguing with his father because something bad is about to happen to him. Only, instead of with great power comes great responsibility, it's with great power comes great mistrust and hatred from humanity, so you should never help anyone, ever, including me. Same basic motivation. Anyway, a storm suddenly realizes the plot needs it, so a tornado appears. All traffic is suddenly stopped and blocked the road, showing that there is no way to escape what's coming. Jonathan starts telling everyone to get under the overpass to shield them from the tornado, even though that would almost certainly kill all of them. Then Jonathan carries a young girl to safety, while Martha screams that somebody needs to go back for the dog. So how many red flags do we have on our plate so far? Going back to save the dog, the Uncle Ben moment, and ominous dark clouds of no return.
Who saw that come? Who saw where that came from?
Even though all of this foreshadowing is probably intended to build tension in this scene, like to build that feeling of dread in your gut, what it actually ends up building is frustration, because the setup and execution of how all of this is about to play out is extremely irritating. Jonathan decides to go save the dog himself, rather than sending his younger, faster, and invulnerable son, who would have in no way revealed his superpowers doing so, which says to the audience that Jonathan knows it's impossible for a normal human being to make this, which means he knows he's walking into his own death, to save a dog that his son could have saved and nobody would have been able to tell the goddamn difference without requiring any super speed or super strength, because you didn't need those and you would have made it just fine if not for the ankle injury. There was absolutely zero risk in revealing Clark's powers here. And if you're a defender of Man of Steel, you're probably shouting, "He did it to protect Clark, you idiot." And my response to that would be, yep, he did. I agree with you. Not a hard concept to grasp. The problem here is the setup, the situation, the execution of the scene, regardless of its intended meaning, is lost because the movie makes us question every decision the characters are making. that completely distracts from what this is all supposed to mean. Never mind how nice you think the symbolism is behind Jonathan's death. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about bad filmmaking. Like I said earlier, Snyder as a director only cares about tone and aesthetics. He cares, first and foremost, about making things look good. He cares about getting this shot of Jonathan raising his hand to Clark as he's slowly washed over by the movie's CGI budget. As a result, the audience is now shouting at the screen. Jonathan's sacrifice to protect his son's secret utterly fails to connect to the audience because of this. This whole thing is so unbelievable, so impractical, that it breaks our suspension of disbelief. It sucks the audience out of the movie, like a tornado, and now we're angry, shouting, and criticizing the movie instead of emotionally engaging with what it's all supposed to mean. And it's such an easy problem to solve that this scene shouldn't even exist. Either Clark saves the dog, or Clark saves Jonathan. Instead, we get this frustrating build-up that results in the audience questioning every choice. Man of Steel is guilty of that a lot. I mean, even worse is the fact that Man of Steel was kind of billed on being a more grounded and realistic take on Superman, but it isn't. Real people don't think or act like this, and that's very frustrating. Comparison time. How did Earth 1 handle the death of Jonathan Kent? Well, it didn't, which is a whole lot better than doing it badly. Earth 1 shows us Clark solemnly floating over his father's grave as he has like a one-sided conversation with it. This implies absolutely everything they need to know about what his death means to Clark. How he dies doesn't matter. What his death means to Clark does. So why show it at all? See, it takes very little work to do it right. This is overall an extremely effective way of addressing this very emotional subject. But it takes a tremendous amount of work to screw it up this badly. What a mess. After all that talk of wanting to live differently from what society wants earlier on in the movie, and after the argument you literally just had about wanting to find your own way in life, does Clark disobey his father and make his own choice to save him? Nope.
I let my father die because I trusted him. Because he was convinced that I had to wait.
Yes, you did, Clark. You let your father die for something anyone in their right mind knew was wrong. Your father is dead, and the audience now hates both of you for it. The only thing this scene succeeded in doing was showing us that Zack Snyder was never fit to direct these characters in the first place. Oh wait, actually, it also succeeded in showing us how screwed up this version of Superman is. To further establish that Clark is a terrible person, we get this scene. He's got a job working at a trucker bar, and naturally, because this is a trucker bar, some drunk asshole tries to start a fight. But instead of resolving this situation in any of the ways an employee of a place like this would be expected to do, he quits. But I don't think your boss hired you here for your drink mixing abilities. I'm pretty sure they hired you because this is a trucker bar, and you're huge and jacked. I mean, what was this idiot even thinking? Even without superpowers, a guy Clark's size could break him in half. Look at the size of him. It's not like gently taking this guy by the arm and escorting him outside would raise so much as an eyebrow when this didn't. He is a tiny man compared to you. Why would you take a job at a bar like this if you aren't able to deal with these kinds of situations? So then we cut to presumably a few hours later, where we see the tiny man leaving the bar, only to discover his ride's been jacked up, because Superman loves petty vengeance. Oh my god, this movie's frustrating even when it's trying to be funny. This is exactly the kind of thing Superman doesn't do. Like fundamentally, as a person, Clark's lacking even basic empathy here. I mean, think about it. You don't know what's going on with this guy's life. What if he's working to afford medication for a sick kid at home? He's like frustrated over a divorce that's going on while he's on the road far away from home. So, to blow off some steam with his buddies, he came to this bar to have a few drinks. Well, that'd make you kind of a monster, wouldn't it, big guy? I mean, compared to gently making the guy leave the bar, do you really think this is less harmful? What the hell's his insurance claim gonna say? Stealing the truck would have been kinder. At least then you know he'd be covered. Like, there's this scene where Clark refuses to fight back against bullies to show that because he's too powerful, he knows he shouldn't. I guess the part of the movie we didn't see was that later that night, Clark and Jonathan went to his family farm and burnt their barn down. Your sense of humor doesn't work, movie. Which leads me to, I don't really have a good segue for this one. Yeah, so, Lois.
Harry, come on, it's me we're talking about. I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter.
Then act like it.
If you spend any time on the internet, you might hear people saying that Lois isn't actually a character at all in this movie, but rather a magic teleporting plot device that appears wherever the bad writing needs her to be.
General Zod would like this woman to accompany me.
That she is utterly undeveloped as a character and exists for the sole reason that a big-budget studio movie needs a love interest to hit all of the demographics. And those people are 100% correct. Not much else to say about that, so moving right along. I love this part. We see Lois casually leaving her room in the middle of a heavily guarded military base, in the middle of the freezing Arctic night air, and conveniently, in that exact moment, she happens to see Clark looking suspicious. But he's only suspicious because he's wearing street clothes. If he'd been wearing normal winter gear, no one would have suspected a thing. Like, if his idea of laying low is casually walking around in negative 40-degree weather inside of a heavily manned and probably closely monitored military installation, then he's clearly just an idiot. Good job being stealthy there, buddy. You're really honoring your stupid dead father's stupid dead wishes. I mean, Lois's camera probably isn't the only one here. Anyway, defying common sense, and also asserting someone's super senses, Lois follows Clark onto the buried Kryptonian ship. And while inside the ship, Clark finds a thing and decides to put the thing he got from the other thing into the new thing, revealing that in 18,000 years, Krypton hasn't changed the shape or format of its storage devices. Anyway, in doing the thing, Clark deactivates a security robot that had attacked him. Or did he? Because it immediately reactivates to attack Lois when she pisses it off with her camera.
I have to protect my image!
And because of this, Lois and Clark finally meet face to face, through her screams of abject horror.
It's all right.
Then he delivers some bad news.
If I don't cauterize this bleed.
Isn't love at first sight so romantic? One for the history books. I think the reason why Lois is so terrible in this movie, and why their relationship in general is completely unearned garbage, is because the filmmakers wrongly assumed that the core relationship between Clark Kent and Lois Lane was kinda outdated. You know, like people always say, why can't Lois Lane ever figure out that Clark is Superman? So there are a million ways of handling this that are all better than the one this movie went with. Like, I always liked the idea of Clark having such precise control of his facial muscles that he's actually able to change the shape of his cheeks, jaw, and brow without ever breaking a sweat. Then when he becomes Superman, or is at home relaxing with the Kents, he can be himself. I mean, Clark is also himself, but you know what I mean. Here's the thing though. The overall point of this relationship, whether you modernize it or not, is that it's all about build-up. Build-up that eventually pays off when Lois figures it out. It's all about this game they play. Like, Clark wants to tell Lois who he is, but he also thinks that if she only likes him for Superman, then she doesn't really like him as a person. It creates this tension, this drama. I mean, she gives him these glimmers of hope that she actually kinda likes Clark too, but she's still far more interested in Superman, which is kinda bittersweet for him. But because of this, Clark and Lois are always kind of thinking about each other, and over time, that kind of grows into mutual respect, and eventually into real romantic love. It's supposed to be teased and built up. It's like supposed to give us a relationship that is sometimes heartbreaking and sometimes fun. It would show us how he forms meaningful connections to people, even though he's trying to hide his secret. It also would characterize Lois as a real person who is flawed, but admits when she makes a mistake. Which is one of the reasons why Clark always finds her so attractive, because he sees in her the good things he likes about humanity. So, sure, you don't have to do it exactly that way, but you do need some kind of a core to this relationship, something more than, like, emotions running high after a series of traumatic experiences. But in Man of Steel, we're just supposed to accept that these two are a couple because Clark Kent just has to hook up with Lois Lane. I guess it's their destiny. Characterization and storytelling be damned. Zack Snyder, probably. Because a well-developed Lois and a well-developed romance would distract us from the movie's real goals of violent screaming, fistfights, and Jesus symbolism. This is supposed to be one of the most legendary romances ever. The eventual payoff when she figures him out is like the most satisfying thing ever. The mix of love, shock, betrayal, sadness, and gradual understanding, as she sees that these two opposing people suddenly make perfect sense. It's cute and happy and sad all at the same time. It's genuine emotion and honest drama, and a real connection between these two people. The tension finally snaps and we're right there with them, buying into this real emotional drama. It could even be, dare I say, funny? But this movie completely robs the audience of that payoff, of really any kind of payoff. Lois is just this token female love interest. It kinda makes the relationship feel completely meaningless by comparison. Like, I would not be the least bit surprised if Lois and Clark break up off-screen between movies, because there is no foundation here whatsoever. We barely even have a few scenes of them interacting with each other, and most of those aren't even particularly friendly.
Careful with those, they're heavy.
Eventually culminating in a kiss that feels totally out of place and completely unearned. Holy shit, lady, where the hell did that come from? You two barely even know each other. You have come nowhere near building up to this. The audience needs something. Don't force this into a movie if you're not going to give it the proper amount of attention.